And it's working. Hooray! Okay, technology is our friend for at least the moment. So we are moving on to Eduyot, chapter 4, Mishnah 3. And to understand this, we're going to have to understand a few of the topics that are being discussed. So one of the first things is, what is something that is, lost isn't probably the right, we'll start with a little bit closer to the topic. Ownerless, right? What counts as something being ownerless? Kind of a weird question, right? If you walk into my house and you see my my TV, is my TV ownerless?
No.
No, right? Definitely not ownerless. On the other hand, if you are walking through the middle of the Sahara Desert and there is nobody living for 5,000 miles in any direction, I don't think that's the real number, but you know, no one anywhere, and there's a TV sitting in the middle of the sand.
It's ownerless.
It's ownerless, right? So the technical term is hefker, that something is totally ownerless, and the language that's used is it's ownerless like the dust of the earth, right? When you're walking down the street, if you pick up a bit of dirt that's, you know, on the ground, no one says, "Hey man, that's my dirt." It is ownerless.
Hefker.
Hefker, yeah.
So it's the same as the woman when the husband disappear. It's the same term.
It means to be abandoned. Yes.
But it's the same term in Hebrew.
Yes. And that comes back to how something becomes ownerless if it used to have an owner, right? Because the dust of the earth, I don't assume anybody really owned that. I mean, maybe it blew off somebody else's field somewhere. But for that reason, actually, that's not a bad example. So why is it that the dust is ownerless? Because if it blew off my field and it's blown away in the wind, is there any chance I can ever get that back? Right? Am I going to be able to go with like posters saying, "Excuse me, have you seen this dirt? My dirt flew away last month. It looked brown and it was made up of small particles. Could you find my dirt?" No, no one can do that. And because it is not going to be found, you give up hope, right? You abandon all hope of returning this. And because you've given up hope, you've now basically said, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It's gone. Right? That moment where you say it's gone is when things become ownerless, when they become hefker, right? You have just, given up hope is really the best way of describing it. Now, there are long discussions in both the Mishnah and even longer discussions in the Talmud of when exactly that moment happens of giving up hope. Because you may give up hope for your dust off your field, but are you going to give up hope for your family's favorite diamond ring, right? Is that lost or not lost? Is that ownerless or that not ownerless because somebody's still out there looking for it and, you know, putting signs up all over the house? Which is why, for example, the Torah says if you come across a donkey, you don't just assume the donkey is ownerless. You assume the donkey belongs to someone and you try to find the owner, right? The Torah tells us that we are responsible to try and find the owner. There is a bit of a limit to that, and someday we'll go through in more detail and talk about the lost and found laws. But that is a principle that we don't assume everything is ownerless unless it's obvious that it's ownerless. Make sense? Okay. Now we're going to try and twist that a little bit. All right. Come up with a special case. So we don't have our usual narrator here tonight, which means that we're going to have to take turns. Again, as always, if you're not happy reading out loud in public, just say pass. And do you mind if we start over with you, Richard? No. Okay, just because it's easy for me to point to my left. So we are in Eduyot 4:3. That means Mishnah 3, part 1.
Beit Shammai says, produce pronounced ownerless with respect to the poor only is counted as ownerless.
Okay, so what he's trying to say here is produce. You can, if you are the owner of produce, you can say, that is now ownerless, meaning that field or that part of the field or the corners of the field and other such things, right? You have the image of an owner of a farm saying that, right? This produce is ownerless. But what Beit Shammai is adding is he's saying this is ownerless as far as the poor go, meaning if a rich guy wants to come and take some of my wheat, hands off, that still belongs to me. But if a poor guy wants to come and take some of my wheat, of course, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. That's what Shammai is trying to say, is that you can make something ownerless for a category, in this case, the category of poor, even while retaining ownership against the category of someone else. Clear? What? No? So let me give an example from the house, right? Most families, you have the parents and you have the children. And for the parents, if your husband goes into the wife's purse and borrows $20 because they need $20 to put gas in the car, that's fine, right? The money is not only the wife's, and even if it is, she doesn't mind that the husband takes it, right? It's ownerless to him. If the kids come and take $20 and go out and buy candy, now the mom is rather upset, right? Because it wasn't ownerless for you. It was only ownerless for the father. And so it means the relationship of the person to the product makes a difference of whether the product is available to them or not available. And what Shammai is saying is that you can divide ownerless so that it is yes for the poor and so that it is no for the rich. And that's what he's trying to say.
So what does it mean, yes, for the poor?
It means that a poor person could come and take the fruit from your field, and that's fine. And it becomes them and it's not stealing. But if a rich person tried to do that, it would be stealing because you didn't say that they could take it.
So it's a way to be pro people.
Exactly. Right. This is a form of tzedakah, of allowing.
The full corner, right?
Well, this is a little bit different. What he's trying to say is that for the four corners is mandated by Torah, but this is trying to say if you wanted to say your whole field, right? Take my field, right? Poor people, you're welcome. 4-3. That too. So he says, go ahead and take it, but only this group can take it. Well, in order for that to work, if he doesn't know who's taking it, right? It's very different if I know that I have a neighbor that's poor and I say, hey, neighbor Bob, come, take from my field. It's okay. That's not the same thing. This is him saying anybody who takes it that happens to be poor, that's okay, right? It is ownerless and therefore it's not theft.
But anything or just only things from the field?
Well, this particular Mishnah is talking about produce. I mean, technically you could do that with your car if you wanted to. It'd be a little tricky. You may want to check the people who are taking your car, but this is talking about produce as the case that's here. But it could be anything, yes.
It could be any produce.
Yeah, any kind of produce. It could be,
also a tree.
Yeah, I mean,
also a cow.
taking a tree and taking a cow would be taking it a bit far. Most people didn't have so many sheep and cows that they could just give them away to anybody who wanted them. But if they want, then that's fine.
But there's no limitation here.
Right. Well, that's Beit Shammai's opinion. Right. Beit Shammai's opinion is that the owner can decide to make some things of his possession ownerless for some people.
So the owner decide what will be.
The owner, yes, exactly. Right. The owner was the one.
Depending how generous is the owner, depending how many possibilities have the poor people who have something quality.
Potentially, yes, but that's true of any tzedakah, right? This is only one particular way that it's being described, because as we're going to see, Beit Hillel has a different position, because otherwise we wouldn't have an argument. So, what's Beit Hillel's position?
But Beit Hillel says it is not counted as ownerless unless it is made ownerless also with respect to the rich. It's in the year of release.
All right. So, what's happening is that Beit Hillel is saying, no. If you want to say it is ownerless, then it has to be 100% ownerless. It can't be sort of ownerless, because that's not what ownerless means, right? It's not owner-mish or owner maybe. It's ownerless, and it just like in the Shemitah year. In the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, right? The produce of the field is available to everybody, right? Whatever is growing naturally, you don't have to be poor to come and take it. Anybody can come and take it. In fact, the owner of the land doesn't even get priority of the produce of the field during the sabbatical year. So it is truly and utterly ownerless. And Beit Hillel's opinion is that has to be the way you make a declaration of ownerlessness. Ownerlessness. Now that's English.
Is this an argument of semantics? Because I take it they both agree that the owner can give the poor the right to take from the field.
Well, not exactly. They both agree that the owner can give the a poor person or a group of poor people that are enumerated the right to take whatever they like, right? And of course, they both agree that the owner can give gifts to any poor people that he wants to give gifts to. What they're arguing about here is that this particular vehicle for giving is more difficult than what Beit Shammai says.
Right. But if there's other vehicles, does it come down to an argument of semantics?
Of course, but semantics matter, right? I mean, language matters, and the way the law is carried out matters. If you try to act like, in this particular case, one of the underlying issues has to do with tithing, right? If I have relinquished ownership of something, I don't have to tithe it. If I retain partial ownership of something vis-a-vis a category of other people, then do I tithe it or don't I tithe it? Right? Then whose property is it? So if you retain some ownership, then tithing becomes a horrible mess. And that's really one of the underlying reasons why Beit Hillel is saying, no. It's completely ownerless or it's not completely ownerless. You can give it away if you want, but you can't give it away by calling it ownerless. It has to become yours first. You tithe from it, and then you give it away.
Since we're going into the tax law,
well, it is that time of year, right?
Didn't on the forgotten sheep though?
We're going to get there in a minute.
Because I remember they had the corners and were not taxed.
The payout, yeah.
And I thought you could. I thought you could give more than just the corners as payout.
Right. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna do also the forgotten sheaves in just a minute.
All right.
So you're right on the right direction because let's move to part 2.
If all the sheaves of the field were of 1 kav each, and one was of 4 kavim, it was forgotten. Beit Shammai says it does not count as forgotten.
And go ahead and read Beit Hillel.
Says it counts as forgotten.
Okay. So the forgotten sheaves of the field. The Torah says in Deuteronomy that if you're out harvesting your field and you forget one of the sheaves, the bundles of grain from your harvest, right? One of the right, like that, right? Everybody agrees, by the way, that the dropped stalks are an issue, but are free. But these are the small bundles of grain that you do. And normally, if you're a farmer, the way this works is you go like run, dun, 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 boom, dun, 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 dun. You grab a bunch at once, and then you bundle them and drop them down. And then at the end of the day, you come back and you pick them all up and you take them to your barn, right? So I know we're all farmers, so I don't need to tell you this, but that's the way the farming worked in the ancient world, and really up until the modern times, right? So you bundle a bunch, you cut them, you wrap them, you leave them. You come back at the end of the day, you put them in your barn, or you have someone else putting them in the barn right after you, depending upon how much help you have. Okay, so imagine that you're bundling, and each bundle you do is 1 kav. Now, a kav was a measure of unit of the amount of grain that you had bundled. So let's call it just a pound, just because it's easier in English, and the amount is more important in other issues, but not so important for tonight. So let's imagine each one's a pound, and you leave one of those behind at the end of the day, right? You didn't remember, you forgot about it. It was, maybe at the head of the line and you just overlooked it or whatever. That forgotten sheaf becomes automatically ownerless, whether you like it or not, right? As soon as you forget it, it's no longer your property. Make sense?
But it's ownerless only to the poor.
But that is only ownerless to the poor, yes. But that is happening automatically without your involvement in it.
That's Shammai.
No. That's the Torah. The Torah says you forget a sheaf, it's not yours anymore, buddy. It's gone, right? It is no longer owned by you.
Even in the middle of the day?
When it's forgotten, right? So the definition of forget is important, right? Because this is not like a dropped sheaf or stalk. This is a forgotten one. So the question is, does it count as forgotten if it's 4 times bigger than all the others, doesn't that look like you were bundling it special? And if I bundled it special, can you just say it was forgotten because it was forgotten? Right now, that may sound a little weird, but that's Beit Shammai's opinion. Beit Shammai's opinion is, even though he forgot it out in the field, it was done differently. It was a special one. So we can't say it was really forgotten, even though he actually did forget it. And because it's not normal, it's an abnormal bundle. And Beit Hillel says, if he forgot it, he forgot it. Right? That's what forgetting means. And I don't care how special you bundled it and put little stars on it or whatever, and maybe even tied a little note saying, don't forget me. You forgot it. And because you forgot it, it doesn't belong to you anymore. Make sense? Okay.
Maybe he had an emergency. He had to go home, maybe. And
Or you need to go to the bathroom.
Okay, so again, by forgetting, we're not talking about I turned my back and then, oh my God, where did it go? Right.
How long is forgotten?
Right.
How many hours after they being the field before you forget it?
5 o'clock
Right.
is forgotten, or
When you finish your labor.
2 o'clock.
Exactly. When the labor looks like it's done.
What happens if you arrive at home?
So this is why there's like a whole.
30 minutes
This is why there are chapters about this topic,
Ah.
right? Not only this one section, right? So remember, Eduyot is not about telling us everything we need to know on a particular topic. It's about recording the different opinions on some of the topics. It's highlighting the disagreements, not giving us all the answers we need. That's why we've got whole chapters that deal with these topics in other parts of the Mishnah, which you're welcome to go look up.
But I want to know the answer.
I know. Eduyot is the ultimate teaser, right? It's like watching the previews of other parts of Mishnah, and then the answer is go look in that chapter. It's like, no. So it gives you a taste of all these different topics so that you can go and look them up and study them. But it's, again, the emphasis is on the difference of opinion and the arguments and how the arguments worked or didn't work. One thing I do want to highlight here is what this means when we're looking at categories where we said Beit Shammai is more lenient than Beit Hillel, right? Well, what counts as lenient in these cases? Because usually when we think of lenient, it's like, can I do this on Shabbat or can I not do this on Shabbat? Or is this kosher or is this not kosher? And lenient means it's okay, and not lenient means don't do it. But how do we apply the label lenient to this case?
It goes by the owner.
So it seems to be lenient with regards to giving the owner more permission, giving the owner more control over his or her property. That seems to be the definition of lenient. But if you were poor, that would be the definition of strict, right? Because if I'm poor, I want you to be lenient for me. And that's why the term lenient and strict is not as easy to nail down as people act, right? Because being lenient for the owner means being strict on what the poor can take. And being lenient for the poor means you're being strict on how the owner can use his own property.
No, I want to say that it's more lenient for me for the poor because give them more flexibility, more opportunities to grab the owner less.
If you're Beit Hillel,
no, more Shammai, because Hillel more strict because if it's not for everyone.
Oh, for the first half, yes. For the first half.
It's not.
Yes.
But in Shammai, it's more flexible. Say,
Right.
You know what? No, maybe we can do a little less strict for the poor and give them more opportunity, more options.
But notice, so if you were reading the Reisha and the Seifa, the beginning and the end as two separate ideas, that could work. But what we have here is one Mishnah with a beginning and an end, and in both of them, it's telling us that Shammai is more lenient. So we have to find a thread that is common for both of them, because in the first one, Shammai finds it easier to make more available for the poor. But in the second one, Shammai's position makes it less easy to find extra for the poor, because now these super bonus sheaves, the poor aren't allowed to take. So he's not being good to the poor in both of them. Instead, what he's doing is saying the owner has more control, right? He's being lenient on the ability of the owner to control his produce. He can decide whether it's ownerless for this group or not that group. He can decide that big bonus sheaves are not forgotten. So
I was gonna say, wouldn't it be lenient because the commandment to leave the sheep lies with the owner? There's no commandment for the poor to take them.
Well, no. There's no commandment to take other than to survive.
Yeah,
but
obviously you're leaving less for the poor, but as far as the personal commandment, it's more lenient for me.
because the owner is the one in the position of power, right? He is the actor in the mitzvah because he's the one with the means to act. So
Still roofing.
they're still roofing at
That's good.
7:30.
And Shammai and Hillel wasn't removed Hillel.
And Hillel is saying the owner doesn't have that control, right? Again, he's not being bonus to the poor, and he's not being anti the poor. He's just saying the owner doesn't get to decide what ownerless means, right? He has to follow the universal law of the sabbatical ownerless rules. And yes, that means it will be slightly harder than it might otherwise be to get the produce to the poor in this particular way. But that also means he doesn't get to decide what forgotten sheaf means by having jumbo sheaves, because that's also not his decision to make. That's the decision of the general community. And in Beit Hillel's opinion, the general community says, I don't care how big your sheaf is. It's not forgotten. Now, I should point out that the argument is made in the Talmud and agreed upon that if you have a bigger than 4 kav sheaf, everybody agrees that was a special stack, and therefore it is not considered ownerless, and that is not available to the poor. So they're only arguing about the maximum right here, not the minimum.
Sorry, one more thing. Talking about the balance of the stuff, though, back onto the first part of the Mishnah,
right?
What you by making them declare the field ownerless in regard to the poor,
right?
You're taking the tithes away from the priest, though, right?
I mean, for the additional tithe that would go to it,
right? Because
well, it's not just for the priest. Depending upon what year the tithe is being given, it may go to the priest. It may also go to the poor. But the question is not who's being benefited or who's benefiting or being hurt by doing this. The question is, what is the actual law, and how does that derive from the Torah? You may also remember that the Torah itself says, do not show deference to the rich or to the poor when making judgments. Right? We don't decide, halakha based on who's rich or who's poor. There's a very famous sort of story that goes around where if there's a poor person and he's having an argument with his rich neighbor over who owns a piece of land, if the rich person proves that he does own the piece of land, the court shouldn't give it to the poor person to help him, right? The court shouldn't say, oh yeah, but he's poor, so he needs it more. Let's go ahead and let him have it because that'll help him more. No, the court has to say it belongs to the rich person if that is what the law is, right? If that is what the proof of ownership really does show. And then, yeah, you can still help the poor person with tzedakah and loans and everything else, but you're not allowed to make justice twist to help either the poor or the rich, right? Obviously, we all agree that you don't want to make justice go help like the powerful. We're all sort of in that same group. I think we agree. Yeah, that's part of being America. But we also have to recognize you don't twist justice to help the poor. You have other institutions to help the poor, not the courts.
But like in the first one, let's say we're using money instead of produce. If I was going to give $100,
right?
Under Beit Shammai, the $100 would go to the poor. Under Beit Hillel,
it potentially could
90 would go to the poor, and the other 10% would go to the tithe.
No. In the ownerlessness of Beit Hillel, right? You would make the entire field universally unowned, right? Universally ownerless.
If you want to give it to the poor, sorry.
Oh, well, but you can still give it to the poor by making it ownerless, but you just also know that it could be taken by someone else, right? You can't means test who's coming to take it.
Right. I mean, I was assuming that you wanted to give it to the poor because nobody likes to give money to the rich.
That's a political statement. We're going to move on from there before I say something not befitting 501c3.
Yeah, especially on the record.
No. Yes, I know. But back on Mishnah.
Yeah. And is leaving or forgetting something in the field, but it's only about product, or what about the tools?
No, it's only produce.
No tools.
Yeah, you leave your plow in the field. That no one gets to take it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That is very clear. All right, good. So now we are on Mishnah 4:4, which we're going to continue with our sheaf. So I don't need to do any more introduction for this one. And Aaron, I think we're up to you if you'd like to read.
All right. Did I read the introduction or
Just go straight with number 1.
A sheep which was close to a wall or a stack or to the herd or field utensils and was begotten, Beit Shammai says it does not count as begotten, and Beit Hillel says it counts as begotten.
Okay, so here we have a sheaf, and the sheaf looks like it's been put somewhere, right? That it's been put next to a wall. It's been put next to the herd. Now, these aren't in the barn. These aren't in a clear pile of where the grain is all kept. So there's still enough doubt, right? Everybody agrees if you put it in the barn, it wasn't forgotten. Like, hey, man, look, he forgot a whole bunch of hay in the barn. Everybody agrees that's called theft. But this is a question of he picked it up from the field, or maybe he was next to the field-ish and he put it down. Is it his or is it not his? Now, Beit Shammai is going off the opinion that it's clearly been moved and put in a particular place.
It's very consistent with the previous one.
Very consistent.
Because for Hillel, no matter the size, no matter where you put it, you forgot, you forgot.
Exactly.
And Shammai, if you put in a special situation, a special
Right.
site,
Even if you forgot it,
yeah.
you didn't forget it legally.
So both are very consistent.
Exactly. They are both very consistent, which is not surprising that, a particular bait, a particular school would have a consistent pattern of analyzing the same types of problems. So let's make sure everybody just understands that, because this is a continuation of the same theme, which is Beit Shammai's general opinion is if you've distinguished it by location or by size, then it's clearly not forgotten. His idea is that forgetting doesn't equal legal forgetting, right? That just forgetting with your mind doesn't mean it was actually forgotten, because you clearly set it aside. You clearly made a statement that this was not to be forgotten. And so even if you did, it doesn't count. And Beit Hillel is the opposite, which says, yeah, if you put it somewhere safe, then you didn't forget it. But if you put it somewhere and forgot it, that's called forgetting, mister. And forgetting means that the Torah says it's open, right? It is now fair game. So even if you put it somewhere, so I'm not going to forget it, that doesn't count.
And the law go by
Beit Hillel, yeah. All right, so that one should be pretty quick. Okay. And yeah, back page. 4-5.
A vineyard of the 4th year, Beit Shammai says it is not subject to the law of the 5th, nor to the law of removal.
All right, I should have, I forgot. I should have given the introduction to this one before we started. Because we're on a whole new topic. We're still talking about food and what we grow, but it's a whole new topic. All right, so anybody here, I know Natan, you're getting an olive tree, right? And we're getting an olive tree. So we're from the shul, we're selling the olive trees through the school. If I'm going to go home and I'm going to plant my olive tree and it's going to start growing, and let's imagine that by some miracle it's giving me fruit next year, am I allowed to eat it according to Jewish law?
No, 3.
Oh, well, more than 3 actually, right? So Jewish law gives a 3-year waiting period, right? During the 3-year period, you're not allowed to eat the fruit from a new tree.
Yeah, the first year is also for
the 4th year, which is what we're talking about here, right? The vineyard of the 4th year. It's not, no, it's actually not. It is eat at Jerusalem, right? You would take it and you would enjoy it at the temple and in Jerusalem. That
you or the quality.
You. Yep.
You need to take and eat with
Right.
your family in Jerusalem.
Right. Now, you could redeem it, right? Which is going to be important in a second. You could redeem it. Now, redeeming doesn't mean you get it back. Redeeming means I've got 5,000 new olives. I can't take all of these olives to Jerusalem. Instead, I will cash them out. I'll take the money. I'll go to Jerusalem and I'll buy something there. So I'm still eating the fruit, by eating the money that I got for the fruit.
But you need to buy the same fruit. You can buy any fruit.
You can buy anything, what you like. Yeah, you can buy what you like because it's not the same fruit no matter what.
Well, that's a nice deal.
But no matter what, even if I buy apples because I had apples back at home,
Yeah,
it's still not the same apple.
I know, but I was expecting that you need to buy with the money apples and to eat apples in Jerusalem.
No,
And
it's
not a buffet.
well, you would be very strict on that particular point.
Shammai.
Okay, and then right going forward, it's okay. Right after that, it's okay. So for this Mishnah, we are zooming in on this 4th year, and what we can and can't do with it, because there's a disagreement. It's not only, by the way, about vineyards. It's also about other types of fruit from the field, from orchards. But this is also about vineyards. I don't want to go to sorry, sometimes I have to stop myself from going down too much detail. This is also about vineyards. There are some that will refer to this law according to the term vineyard. And because the second half is also absolutely about grapes, it just fits mnemonically to talk about vineyards. But it's not only about vineyards, which is why we're talking olives. Okay. Yeah. In general, or to the detail of the Mishnah?
The 4th year.
Okay, yeah.
Because the 4th year means that there's a second tithe that year, but there's not a second tithe that year.
The 4th year of the tree.
Right, but I mean,
But that may or may not be a 4th year of tithing.
but yes. What happens if the 4th year is not a year of tithing, of the second tithe?
Yeah, then that's fine. You don't have to do a tithe on it.
Oh, so you don't have to do any, but then,
You have to follow whatever. So this is the tree, right?
right,
The tree's years.
right.
But then you have like, the actual 57, 79 years, right? Whatever that lines up with, you have to still follow the rules of this year too, right? So if it's a Jubilee year, if it's a sabbatical year, then you also are governed by the laws of Jubilee and the laws of sabbatical. If it is the year of, second tithe or 4th tithe, then you're governed by those laws. So sometimes you can get, double hit. Sometimes you don't get to touch your tree at all. It all depends on, where it is in both cycles.
So it doesn't fall in a second tithe year or a Jubilee, or you could probably just start eating it, right?
Well, no, because you would still need to do the 4th year redemption, or the 4th year eating in Jerusalem / redemption. Yeah, that happens depending upon the tree's year only, which is, by the way, why we have Tu B'Shvat. Right, the whole point of the holiday of Tu B'Shvat isn't to have a holiday that says, yay, trees. We love trees, that's fine. But that's when we count for all of our trees a new year. Right? So if you were to plant a tree in November, come the end of this week, that tree is 1 year old. And if you plant a tree the day after, it's going to be all the way until next Tu B'Shvat that tree is 1 year old.
So the best time to plant is 1 week before Tu B'Shvat.
Except that's not always the best time to plant your tree. You're thinking too much like an accountant, not like a farmer, right? A farmer is going to tell you that you have to plant trees in the right season. You don't plant them when you just feel like it. But yes, if you were trying to maximize or minimize the amount of time before the tree was going to give you fruit that you could eat, then yes, planting it as close to Tu B'Shvat as possible would maximize that. But since trees aren't machines, you actually have to rely on the climate and the weather and yes.
But you have to on those 2 years. If you got like on the second year, if a sabbatical, you have to give those fruit to the temple.
No. Because if there's like a tithe during these 3 years, you still can't touch the tree. Right? The tree is off limits for everyone.
Oh, you cannot touch
it.
Nope.
It's literally called uncircumcised. Right? The tree is what's known as orla. Right? It has a foreskin. Right? It is covered. It is protected. You don't touch it. Right? And then eventually we do brit milah. We circumcise the tree, and now you can go ahead and eat the fruit. Okay. Yes, so the argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Oh, I didn't even mention the second half. Sorry. One more point. Tithing. So there's tithing, which means setting aside from your produce the produce that is meant to be given to whoever is receiving it for that particular tithe. And then there's actually delivering it, right? How many people here, you don't have to show hands, but in your heart, how many people here have put like bags full of old clothes for Goodwill or any other thrift store or something, and you put it in the back of your car and you forget to actually drop it off, right? Again, I'm not asking for confessions, but we all know, or that we or someone we know has done that. They've driven around for 3 months with a bag full of old clothes that never quite made it to the drop-off center, right? Or you made a pledge. I'm going to, give the synagogue $50, and it took a long time to write the check, right? Or maybe you even wrote the check, but you forgot to mail the check, right? So that is a question that comes with tithing. Is the main job is once I've tithed it, now I can eat the rest of it, right? Because until I've done the tithe, I'm not allowed to eat from my food, because how else would I know how much to tithe? Right? If I tithe what's left over after I've already filled my stomach, then there's going to be less in the tithe than there would have been if I tithed before I ate. So before you eat any of the food that you've harvested, you have to set aside the tithe. But you don't have to deliver the tithe before you get to eat.
But what happens if you wait too much and the product that the tithe become to be not in good condition?
Okay, so right. What's that? Right. So you would, if you knew, for example, that you were going to be delayed in delivery, then you would cash the tithe into something money, and then you would use the money to do the tithe. But
if you forget, what happens if you don't?
You're in trouble, because you're responsible for the value of the tithe, not for the actual food. Right? You're responsible for the value.
So you need to take the value in monetary and give to the temple.
Or whoever
if you lost the tithe.
If you lost it, exactly. Again, assuming it was your fault rather than just it was swept away by a flood.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's an argument about tithing, and with regards to tithing itself, everybody agrees that in tithing, you actually have to get up off your seat and deliver the tithe by a set time. Now, it's the debate, but eventually we come to, if I remember correctly, the 4th and 7th year, right before Passover. By that point, you've got to deliver your tithe. So if you don't deliver it by then you violated the laws of tithing. Before Passover in the 4th and 7th year is when you have to have delivered the tithe, at least eventually. And that delivery is called removal, right? That's the mailing the check you always plan to send.
That's a good month.
Yes, it's plenty of time, and
9 months.
But on the other hand, you can't punish someone for being a little slow, right? So there is a lot of wiggle room, absolutely, but eventually you have to. The question, finally, that our Eduyot is trying to wrestle with is this: in the 4th year, right? Do you have to remove it as well? The 4th year of the tree. Do you have to remove it as well, or do you not? And in the 4th year, if you want to redeem the food, remember we talked about the redemption because you can't take all your olives to Jerusalem. Generally speaking, when you redeem, you have to do a plus 20% on top of whatever the redemption. So if it was $100 worth of olives, you have to spend $120 in Jerusalem on food. Right? Well, I'm sorry. If you're doing a regular tithe, forget I said olives, because that's the argument. But
it's not 10%.
Tithing is usually 10%. But if you redeem it, there is a 20% penalty.
Really?
If you take the actual food, it's a straight 1-to-1.
It's on the Torah, right?
So it's 20%.
Yes, the Torah itself says that clear.
Over the 10%.
Yes, 20% of the 10%.
Okay.
Right. So not 30%.
Okay.
Not 30%, right? So again, if my tithe is $100 worth of this, I have to, if I want to redeem it, or redeem it for other reasons as well, I have to redeem it for 120%, $120, right? Okay. So the argument is, does that bonus 20% count in the 4th year fruit? And does the law of removal count for the 4th year fruit, right? So Beit Shammai says, no, 4th year fruit is special. So it doesn't follow the same rules of other tithes. And that means that you don't need, if you want to redeem it, you don't have to add 20%, and you don't have to worry about the time limit, fourth year and for the fourth year fruit. Beit Hillel says, it follows the same rules, right? If you want to redeem it, 20%, and you've got to remove it at the same pace, the same time that you would remove your other tithes. Even though it's not technically a tithe, it is still following the same rules as regular tithes. A Beit Hillel.
Why did Shammai say it was special?
Well, because it isn't called a tithe, right? It doesn't fit the definition of a tithe. So why should it have to follow all the same rules of the tithe? And Beit Hillel's opinion, on the other hand, is that no, it is very much similar to a tithe, and therefore it should follow the same tithes. Okay. Question.
No,
You worked out your commentary.
No, the math. That was
the math
112% you need to pay.
Of the original.
Yeah, because the original plus 10% and 20% of the 10%, so it's 112.
It's 12%.
Yeah.
112.
Yeah. That yes.
112%.
Of the original.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Plus 20%?
No. That's with the 20% put in.
It's like having 12%. Okay.
Right.
12%.
What he's saying is that, and I'm not an accountant, but I play one on TV, right? That if I have 10%, right, and then I take 20% of the 10%, if I add that together, I could just save time and say 12% from the beginning, right? Because 20%, 10% plus 20% of 10% equals 12%, right? So that would be what you could do from the start. Or you could do it the way the Torah actually describes it, which is take 10% and then look at that and say, 20% of this I need to increase, right? That's the first column. But that is equal to each other. That's all they were trying to work out. Okay. Part 2.
Bet Shammai says it is subject to the law of fallen grapes and to the law of gleanings, and the poor redeem them for themselves. And Bet Hillel says all of it goes to the wedding press.
Okay. So when you are dealing with a vineyard, remember, now we're dealing with vineyards that we talked about before, then how do we handle the vineyard? Well, the Torah gives us a couple rules. One of them is that it says that we are not supposed to pick the bad clusters or the fallen grapes. Those we're supposed to leave for the poor. Right? This is another part of the Torah's poor legislation. That doesn't sound right. This is part of the Torah's legislation for the poor. The Torah only has great legislation. It never has poor legislation. English, terrible language. So what the question here is in the fourth year, do we still follow these rules, right? We know that for here onwards, right, the grape rules apply. Everybody agrees, right? Once we get into year 5, you have to follow these rules. But the question is, do the grape rules apply in the fourth year? Beit Shammai says, nope, they don't apply because this is not, it's not exactly like, your Beit Shammai says it is, right? Because there's no reason for us to see this as being anything different. Whereas Beit Hillel says, nope, right? Because once it is ownerless and a poor person takes it from that, then the poor person can make it all into wine, which was how you ate grapes, right? That was the way to eat grapes, by the way, for most of human history, because most of our grapes were not table grapes. Most of our grapes were used to make wine or vinegar. But the idea of eating grapes like fruit, yeah, you could, but most grapes were not designed. They weren't grown for that purpose. Just a little bit of food trivia, which, by the way, is why, as a halacha trivia, why we say berei peri hagafen on wine, and why we say berei peri ha'etz on grapes. Right? If you want to eat just grapes, buy the fistful out of the bag, you don't say bari pri hagafen, because that's technically the inferior way to eat the fruit of the vine. Instead, you're eating just like fruit off a tree. But if you want to eat the fruit off the vine the way God intended, make wine out of it. So just a little bit of food and bracha trivia.
Keep interrupting.
Okay, so does everyone understand the idea here?
Is the reason it all goes to the wine press is because it's everything from the tree needs to be tithed. There's no gleaning for food that is tithed. That's the way I read it when I first read it. So you're talking about the 4th year, right? When everything goes to Jerusalem.
Well, no. So this is the 4th year. Sorry, I drew that wrong. This is the 4th year. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4th year tithe.
Right.
4th. The 4th year tithe goes to the poor, right? And the question is, when the poor get the tithe that they get, do they have to tithe what they've now received? Right? Imagine you're a poor person and you just got your tithe. Do you have to take a tithe off of that? And the answer is no, at least according to Beit Hillel and the general halacha. So Beit Hillel says, since you don't do that for the regular 4th year tithe, you wouldn't do that in this situation either.
It's like pay taxes.
On taxes.
Yeah.
Like on,
Or if you pay taxes,
Pay
you
tax
receive
on the welfare.
welfare.
right.
So,
It is. Again, not going to step into the political minefield, but that is a comparable question of should you pay taxes on something that you've received as a gift to help the poor. That would be the more modern equivalent of this argument. All right, looking at the clock, do we have time for 6? You know what? I think we can do it. Yeah, and because it's the end of a particular type of topic. We'll get out of food after 4-6, and then we'll move into some more family topics or issues of family-ish nature when we get to 4, 7, and 8. So 4, 6.
A barrel of pickled olives, Bet Shammai says one needs not perforate it, and Bet Hillel says one must perforate it.
Go ahead and read B.
Also,
Mm-hmm.
but they agree that if it was perforated and the dregs stopped it up, it is not liable to receive impurity.
Okay, so everybody loves impurity questions. Ritual purity is just so much fun. All right, so the Torah in Leviticus says that food cannot become ritually impure until it has been touched by water. The rabbis clarify that water means a number of different liquids, but that touching only matters if you wanted the food to be touched by the water. We're good so far? Okay.
the product, something can become to be impure if it's touched by water.
I've got an apple, right? That's an apple.
Yeah.
That apple is sitting on a tree and it rains on it. It does not become susceptible to become ritually impure. Remember, we're not making it impure. We're making it vulnerable. We're making it available to be ritually impurified. The question is when I pick it, right, and now rain falls on it, nope, I'm still not worried, right? Because that wasn't my water. It wasn't my intention. It's no problem. On the other hand, I've got my sink and I take the apple, I put it in the sink and I wash it to get it ready. Now we've got a question. Right? Now it could become ritually impure. Here's the question that they're dealing with, which is I have my olives. That's an olive now, right? And I put them into a barrel filled with salty water, what we call brine, pickling brine, to try and make them preserved so that they won't rot. Really important before you have a refrigerator. Well, that water, I don't actually want the water. I'm not happy that the water is coming into contact with them. It's not good water for the olives. It's only good because it makes them so they don't rot. So the question is, can everybody just assume that water was not my intentional water? Because if it's not my intentional water, then the olives are still good. They can't become ritually impure. On the other hand, if the water is what I want, then that's a problem. Now they could become ritually impure. So they have two different solutions. Beit Shammai says, no problem, right? Everybody knows that that's what you do with olives, and that water is muck and horrible, and no one actually wants it. Beit Hillel says, no, you got to show it, right? You got to put a hole in your barrel so that the water could leak out, right? Or maybe even put it a little higher up, right? So that way people know you don't want the water, that you'd rather the water weren't there. And that's their argument. And everybody agrees, however, that if the olive bits block the holes and the water doesn't come out, that's okay, because you've at least shown that it's not your desire that the water be there. Everybody here is loving this topic. Okay, well, it's confusing because we're all such wonderful literalists, right? Where if I want the water to do a job, you think I want the water, but I don't. If I could achieve the job without using the water, I would, right? The water is not the benefit. The benefit is the olives don't rot. And therefore the water is doing an essential job, and without which my olives would all be wasted, but it's still not my intended water to have them in, right? That intentionality split is something that much of our modern life has decided we don't need to care about, right? Talk to the police about how much they care whether you meant to be speeding. It's just totally irrelevant. And this is also saying, now look, if you didn't want the water, then the water has a special status. The only thing they're arguing about is whether you have to go to extra steps to show that the water was an unnecessary and unwanted addition. And that means that it doesn't render the olives susceptible to ritual impurity. So
if I understood correctly, if you don't have the intention or you don't want the water, it's okay that nothing can have the potential to become impure.
Correct.
But if you want the water or you have something in mind to any golden water,
right?
Yes, can make the potential to make sensible for impurity.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right. And yes, that sounds cuckoo to us in the modern world, right? Because to us in the modern world, our question is it wet or is it dry? That's how we deal with things. But that's because A, we're not farmers, and B, we don't live with the laws of ritual purity the way that our ancestors did. And to have your food rendered susceptible to ritual impurity was something that was tricky, right? Let's imagine another worst case scenario, right? So I've got my olives, and I pick my olives, and I put them in a big basket, and I put the basket in the barn, right? Great. I come back tomorrow. Do you know if any water was put on them during the night? How would you?
If they're wet.
Was there if they're still wet, then maybe you've got a clue. But if there was a leak in the roof, right, and maybe it splashed on them, or maybe there was an early dew that left water on them, but now it's dried up and gone away, or maybe my neighbor kid came by and went psh, 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 and sprayed it or something. I mean, how do I know whether or not there's water on it? So clearly, it makes much more logical sense to simply say, unless I want the water, I'm not responsible for any dampness that happens to these things. It really is the more logical and natural position to take, whereas we are very binary in our modern legal system because we have the luxury of being very legal and binary in our modern judicial system. Okay, so that's what they're arguing about in part one. Part two is also ritual impurity, but this is a different topic, right? We talked a little bit about this before. We didn't go. Oh yeah, you're still about the olives?
Yeah, is that because the water keeps them from spoiling, right? Or they're
well, the water preserves them, right?
Preserves them. Is there like a? It seems like based on Beit Hillel's view, a lot of times people are trying to show deceit, like pretend they don't want the water in by putting the holes.
Deceit's not the right word, right? To demonstrate one's intention explicitly,
right,
rather than rely on it being an assumption.
But
right?
What happens if you really want the water in there, but you put the holes in there to make it look like you don't, so they don't contract impurity?
It still contracts impurity.
All right.
Because it's your desire.
It's your desire.
Now,
right.
Why did you put the holes in it if you wanted the water?
That would be just deception.
I mean, that will, because what are you planning to do? Sell it to someone else? Right? I mean, if you want the water, but you don't actually want to use it yourself because you're going to sell it to someone else, then you don't actually want the water.
And whose intent does it have to be? Does it have to be the owner's intent?
For at the stage of the watering is what we're talking about here.
No, but I mean, if they're my grapes, and let's say my wife, I'm not married, but if my wife would have put water on them, could they contract impurity?
You know, I'm not 100% sure about that. If someone wets your produce against your will, right? I'm carrying my grapes in from the field, and the mad waterer runs by with a bucket. That I can't quite remember what the halacha is, because I don't remember that situation.
Yeah, because it's the same as rain. It's not under your control.
I would imagine, but I can't swear to that, right? I try not to repeat, or try not to give answers if I'm not 100% sure of what the halacha is, but I don't remember. Logically, I would agree that yes, if it was against your desire, against your will, that it wouldn't count. But again, I don't remember that particular point, and so I can't swear to that. Remember, it's always okay to say, I don't know. Okay, part 2 is similar with a slightly different topic. So we have to get back to how people took baths back then. And the way people took baths back then was people didn't take baths back then. Now, we did go to the mikveh, however, for ritual purity purposes, not for scrubbing down purposes. The most common way to keep a body clean was to rub your body with oil, and then use one of those strigils. Remember we talked about that scraper? And scrape it, and the oil and the dirt off. That was the way you kept yourself clean. And I'm sure it was a great massage, but not exactly what we would look for as a modern form of clean. That's not the issue. The issue is I'm putting oil on my body all the time. That's just a part of living. If you're at least not a really, really poor person, that's part of being a normal person. When I go to the mikveh, oil and water, how does that mix? Right? So that's what we're dealing with in part 2. Right? Normally, oil and water don't mix, and you might think this is a big problem. On the other hand, everybody's covered in oil all the time, and people need to go to the mikveh sometime. How do we deal with that? And so that's kind of what we're dealing with in part 2. You don't have to clean the mikveh. If I drop a dead body into the mikveh and then I pull it out, it's still a kosher mikveh.
Oh, no, but it's disgusting.
Oh, disgusting, yeah.
No, I wasn't talking about it.
Sorry, I thought you meant halacha.
No.
Oh, absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. But as far as the kashrut of the mikveh goes, the mikveh is still perfectly kosher. And by the way, we can always do the reality check, which by the way, don't go to a mikveh if there's a dead body in it. But we can do the reality check, because what is the biggest mikveh of the world? The ocean. And how many dead things are floating in the ocean every single day, right? Everywhere the ocean is full of horrible, horrible things. But that's the whole point, is that the mikveh is pure and perfectly unable to become impure, no matter what's in it. Doesn't mean we should abuse the ocean, by the way, but it does mean as far as the mikveh goes, we don't have to check the water sample to make sure that the mikveh is kosher. Still, never go to a mikveh that you can't see the bottom. That's, by the way, is a good rule of thumb, and there are mikvahot that you will see that unfortunately have not been cleaned regularly, and you can't see the bottom. Don't recommend those. For health purposes, not for halacha purposes. Okay, that was a long introduction. Part 2.
One who had anointed himself with clean oil.
Again, clean means ritually pure oil, not clean like, just nice oil.
And then became unclean, and he went down and immersed himself. Bet Shammai says, although he still drips oil, it is clean.
Right, so you guys have probably all had oil on your hands or something, you've been changing your oil in your car, you were cooking with oil or whatever, and then you wash the oil. You know that the oil and the water like beads on the skin, right? So that it looks like the water isn't really touching you. Well, in general, for the mikveh, having a barrier between you and the water is a big problem. Right? This is why you don't go to the mikveh if you've got a cast on your arm, or even a Band-Aid for that matter. What's that?
Or makeup.
Or makeup, exactly, as a more likely situation. So the question then becomes, well, but if I've got oil, and the oil was ritually pure to begin with, right? It was okay. And then I become unclean, right? Because of something I came into contact with. So now me and the oil are unclean because we came into contact it together as part of my body. And then I go to the mikvah and I come out and it's clear there's still some oil on me. Is that okay or not? And Beit Shammai's opinion is, yep, no problem, right? The oil and you're like one, because that's just the way the body works in their day and age. You just always had that. Beit Hillel has a slightly different opinion.
And Beit Hillel says only what there remains enough for anointing a small limb.
Right, so it's like, yeah, if there's just a little bit of oil on you, then that's okay. But if you're just like oil man, then no, then that's too much. So if you've only got a small portion of oil, then yes, that is okay. So again, notice this probably seems a little more lenient from both positions than what we would expect in the modern day. And I will tell you, by the way, that please do not come to the mikvah covered in oil. The mikvah people will not appreciate that. But in the ancient world, they had to make this allowance of, and it really was a very legitimate idea of, if I rub lotion on my arm before I go to the mikvah, is that lotion part of me or not part of me? Right? Well, most of the time we want the lotion to be absorbed. We want it to be part of us. And there may be a little bit more than my body can absorb at the moment, but it really is kind of me. The question is, how much of it is me? And that's where they're arguing. Is too much or is there too much or not too much? That's what they're arguing about.
And here again, Shammai is more lenient than the Hillel.
In how we might define leniency, right?
In a way that if you have a lot of oil and you are a big mess, still you're fine. Yeah. But Hillel is more picky.
He would like to maintain a stricter standard.
Yes,
exactly. More picky. All right. Part B is just going to change the situation a little bit.
And if from the beginning it was unclean oil, Beit Shammai says it is unclean as long as there remains enough for anointing a small limb.
Right? So Beit Shammai is saying, all right, if the oil was unclean when you put it on you, and then you went, oh no, I used the unclean oil, right? That was in Uncle Moshe's tent when he died, or whatever. Then it's going to take more, or less rather, to now have the mikvah render you unclean. Have the mikvah render you clean. If you come up out of the mikvah and you're still dripping oil, that's what made you unclean in the first place, buddy. You got to get rid of more of it than that. And so what Beit Shammai says is, if you come up and there's, a medium amount of oil still on you, the small limb level worth of oil on you, good enough, the uncleanliness is all considered to be gone because it was in the mikvah too, we're okay. Whereas Beit Hillel,
Beit Hillel says, even if there remains as much as a moist liquid.
So the general way of interpreting this is, if I can touch you and feel the oil, back in the mikvah you go, right? Is that if I can still sense the oil on you, then that's too much because it was the oil that was causing the problem.
And it's the oil that is not, it's
unclean. It's unclean, exactly. The oil itself is unclean. And then read Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of another version of Beit Hillel's opinion.
Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Beit Hillel, provided it remains moist itself and can also moisten other things. So this is a slightly in-between position, which is, if I touch you, I can see that there's oil, and if I touch something else, you can see the oil left on it, right? Like if you touch a napkin to you and the oil comes away, then that is enough for me to know back in the mikvah, right? So it's a slightly higher, it's slightly more oil needed than the original position of Beit Hillel, but it's still much lower than the small limb version that Shammai had. All right, so that's the end of 4.6. We will be turning to 4.7 next week. I like it.